I want to thank Senator Daines, Montana, for providing the room for us today for this discussion. And I want to thank my Chief of Staff, Sean Laporta, who put this discussion together. I also, you'll see there's an empty chair here. Larry Cunningham, unfortunately, was elsewhere occupied with some DHS matters, so therefore, at the last minute, wasn't able to join us. But today we have with us two of our senior fellows, Saul Montes-Bradley, an expert in domestic terrorism, and by extension, global terrorism as well. And with us as well is Martin Johnson, a Gold Institute Senior Fellow who focuses on counterterrorism. And most importantly, he spends his time traveling the country and countries, I guess, training local law enforcement on counterterrorism matters. And whether as from the small one cop towns all the way to NYPD, which is probably the largest local law enforcement in the world. So and one of the best counterterrorism departments in the world as well. So that's we have with us our two fellows. Let me just tell you quickly about the Gold Institute, what we do, and what we're looking to accomplish here. So the Institute was founded to focus on more of strategic blueprints. So we have many institutions, many governmental or non-governmental institutions put forth policies, and we'll come to the Gold Institute to look for strategic blueprints with which to implement those policies. And what's unique about the Institute is that almost every one of our fellows has practical understanding, practical knowledge of whatever the issues may be. So, for example, Martin Johnson, his day job has been for the past 30 years or so, focus, and he'll talk more about his experience as well, on counterterrorism matters. When it comes to defense-related issues, our senior fellows are former military, general staff, and so on. We have former members of Congress, members of parliaments, and so on. So everybody has a unique, hands-on, practical understanding of how things work. We also have scholars who understand who have practical experience on the academic side of things as well. For example, Saul Montes-Bradley has encyclopedic knowledge when it comes to terrorism matters as well. So what we're looking to do here today, what we're going to be talking about, is a project that the Gold Institute has begun, and it's specifically related to anti-Semitism. There are many institutions doing yeoman's work when it comes to understanding what anti-Semitism is all about, understanding the threats of anti-Semitism, and really disseminating that information. That's really very important, and there's so many institutions doing such a great job. What we are doing right now, we're in the process of, and under Martin and Saul's leadership, is to put together a curriculum, something that Martin does on a daily basis. Put together a curriculum for legislative bodies as well as first responders and law enforcement on how to preemptively or proactively counter terrorism, but what we call terrorism de jure, the terrorism of the day, which is which we're going to discuss today, is what we may think of is anti-Semitism. Anti-Semitism, from my perspective, is what we'll call the terrorism of the day. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to our senior fellows. We'll begin with Saul Montes-Bradley, who will discuss anti-Semitism as what we'll call the modern day anti-Semitic terrorism, and then we will move on to Martin Johnson. And again, Saul, if you would begin by maybe giving a few words about your background, your experiences, so that way people know who you are.
We do have 2 or 3 hours for me to talk about myself, right?
Yeah, not quite.
No, you wouldn't like that. Anyway, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for attending this briefing. I'm not your typical scholar at all. Though I come from a family of scholars, I wanted to be an engineer. And that changed dramatically in the early 80s. I first survived a terrorist attack, and then I lost my fiancée to another one. And that set me into the past 34 years of trying to comprehend what is it that causes these things to happen. And whether I can contribute to that conversation or not, we'll see. But that is what I aim to do. So for the past 33 years, I have been studying terrorist movements in South America, the Middle East, Europe, and in the US. The fact that is often overlooked. And coming to what brings us here today, when Eli asked me to join into this project, I thought it was very timely. Anti-Semitism is not something new. We all know about it. There's a lot of people talking about it in every university, in every news organization. And yet, we seem to have, as a society, very little impact in abating it. Those who think that the horrors of the Holocaust have inoculated us against anti-Semitism are being naive or willfully delusional. It's always been there. I would call it anti-Semitism de facto. It exists, it's there. Particularly in many European countries in Southern Europe, it is a daily occurrence. To be a Jew is an insult. And as a matter of fact, whether it be in Spain, France, Argentina, Uruguay, or Brazil, it is often that one hears, "Don't be a Jew." Usually associated with being stingy. Others that I dare not repeat here are perhaps a little more crude. And some of those have percolated into the American lexicon. I don't know how many of you can remember Michael Jackson's "Don't Jew Me." And it expresses an undercurrent of anti-Semitism that exists all around us. That type of anti-Semitism is not terrorism in itself, and it's not much different than every other form of bigotry. Just replace Jew with whatever you want, and it works pretty much the same way, and I don't believe it will ever be stamped out. There's always going to be somebody with a grievance against the world taking it on one particular person or group of persons. But what has happened in the past few years, I find alarming, and I find it has a commonality with the rise of terrorist organizations over the past 60 years. And that is, first, the rise of anti-Semitism, the tolerance of anti-Semitism, whether it be in Europe or the US. Some of it is disguised for political correctness. And since we cannot say we don't deal with Jews, we say we don't deal with Zionists or with Israel. And secondly, it becomes acceptable in some universities to promote boycotts against Israel. I find that an upping the ante, if you will, but most alarming in that it mainstreams what is no less than rancid anti-Semitism disguised as political grievance. In Europe in particular, they're always a little bit ahead of us in these matters. It has taken a turn for the worse in the past decade or so. In France, attacks against Jews have increased 78% in 2019, year over year. There was a 20-some% increase in Germany, but then again, they were ahead of the pack. The total attacks against Jews in France number more than 600, practically 2 a day. In Germany, 1,600. In England, 1,500. When you put it all together, anywhere between 4 and 10 Jews are attacked physically every day somewhere in Europe. If you don't think that's alarming, I think it is. And when you do the numbers over a couple of years, it is frankly discouraging. In Spain, they have taken it one step forward. With the recent elections, there's a new government, a coalition of left-wing parties. The new Deputy Prime Minister of Spain proclaimed to the world that he considers Israel to be an illegal state, whatever he means by that. And based on the encouragement from these governing parties, 53 communities have passed legislation forbidding the city council to have any kind of business with Israel or persons or entities associated with Israel. The people in those cities understood the message quite well. So we have now signs on stores in Valencia, the third largest city in Spain, proclaiming we don't deal with Jews. If this rings like Germany in 1933, it should. The first step in these processes is to marginalize a group, to make them pariahs within the society, thereby justifying attacks, and attacks have come. It is no longer the occasional defacing of tombstones in a Jewish cemetery or the frontispiece of a synagogue. It is now attacks on persons. And as it happens in Europe, it has moved onto the US. I don't think there's anybody in this room who doesn't remember the events in New Jersey not so long ago. And notice that though some would claim this is the consequence of Islamic extremism, in most of the examples that I could give you today, there is no involvement by Islamic extremism. There is no involvement with the black Hebrew Israelites in New Jersey, or with the nativists in France. And a panoply of organizations, from fundamentalist Catholics in particular in France, Italy, and Spain, to Labour Party members in England. We know how that worked in the last elections there, but though they failed miserably in the elections, it doesn't mean that they were promoting or at the very least ignoring rising anti-Semitism within Spain. So I wouldn't say it is an Islamic problem. I wouldn't say it is a Catholic problem, but I would say it is a rather universal problem that cuts across religions and ideologies. The anti-Semite attacking a Jew is as likely to be a left militant in Spain or a right nativist in France or in the US. So we should not put this in terms of politics. And one of the consequences of these events is what I see in the US as something that scares me. It is one thing to have a prominent figure, or even a member of Congress, issuing anti-Semitic statements. one can almost immediately think of it's all in the Benjamins here, or Jews may have other loyalties. But I remember a time when if somebody said that in the US, the whole body would rise to condemn it. And the opposite is true today. In response to this, nearly half the House of Representatives was unable to come together to condemn anti-Semitism in the most bland manner possible, in a way that cost them nothing. It's an empty statement. And yet they could not do it. And that means that anti-Semitism is being mainstreamed, when we are no longer outraged by it. And as it happens with every other form of bigotry, we should be very, very dreadful of it. Terrorism, coming to a close on this and to bring it back to what we're trying to do, is this a form of terrorism? I would pose to you that the killing, maiming, or assaulting of random people in order to terrorize a segment of the population is, by definition, terrorism. And this is where we are now, with a number of organizations from the left and from the right attacking Jews in their places of worship, in their homes, on the street, without nary a consequence in most instances, and a growing acceptance of this as a fact of life. And we are accepting terrorism as the new normal. And I think that what we are trying to do, finding strategies to correct this before we have another Crystal Act, is of the utmost importance. And with that, I'll leave my introduction. As I said, I could talk to you for 2 or 3 hours, but I don't think you have the time or the inclination to listen to it. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody. Nice to see everybody here. My name is Martin Johnson. I've been in the law enforcement and criminal investigation business for about 36 years. I did it for 25, and I've been teaching it for 11. I had the privilege of training over 6,000 police officers and law enforcement investigators across the country. Not quite out of the country yet, unless you call the U.S. Virgin Islands out of the country. Alaska is close. I've been there twice in January. But thanks for that assignment. So I'm involved in this because of my background and what I do right now. And what I do right now is I do domestic counterterrorism training for government agencies and for some non-government agencies, for schools, houses of worship, and things like that. So what we're trying to do at the Gold Institute is put together a program, get something set up so that we can better educate lawmakers, policymakers, and particularly the people who are in charge of trying to stop terrorism before it happens. That being criminal investigators, law enforcement, and sometimes the actual intended victims themselves, or people who might see something. Part of what we want to do is try to put meaning to what I always call the dots. When I was a police officer, I was with Howard County, Maryland Police Department. We had 253 square miles of the entire planet, that's it. 25 miles by 10 miles, that's the whole place. Yeah, and this isn't particularly anti-Semitic, but it is terrorism. Yet Howard County has the dubious distinction of having been home to 5 of the 9/11 terrorists for a while, before September 11. Now, 19 maggots brought the civilized world to its knees, killing 2,977 people faster than Hitler dreamed possible. People are still dying from that. I have a friend from New York Police Department had another piece of the lung taken out because he was at ground zero doing forensics. When we talk about terrorism, Saul alluded to what we think of it. There are interrelated terms as far as our project goes. There are interrelated terms. What is terrorism to begin with? Folks, I speak in plain English, which is helpful, especially when I'm talking with, dare I say, other cops, those 6,000 other cops who I've had the privilege of training. And what it comes down to is terrorism is killing people and breaking things for a cause. If I go rob a bank and shoot somebody during the process so that I can get money, so that I can go blow it on cocaine, that's just greed. That's not terrorism. But if I do it and I rob banks to fund terrorist activity, that's terrorism. So there's a whole world of terrorism. It's not just, okay, one guy goes stabs, somebody shoots, somebody tries to take down a plane. Terrorism it's an industry, it's huge. There are facets to it that go into minute areas that we really can't see a lot of the time. Another term is the anti-Semitism. Okay, I think we all can relatively well define that in our own minds. So are all terrorist attacks anti-Semitic attacks? No. Are some terrorist attacks anti-Semitic attacks? Yes, they are. And we can go back all the way to 1994 with the Brooklyn Bridge machine gunning of a busload of Jewish students. Machine gun lights it up, kills, injures, and the defendant in that case, a guy named Rashid Baz, who was convicted, found convicted. A couple of other people were convicted along with him of hiding things for him after he did it, but before he was caught. Quote, "I only shot them because they were Jewish, period." This is his own statement. So I'll bounce around a little bit, but when I hear Saul talk about the acceptance of anti-Semitism, the even justification that some people in parts of the world, and now the United States, and perhaps previously in the United States, there is acceptance and justification because of how people think. Because being Jewish means you think a certain way. I am not Jewish. I have a liver. I have a heart. I have lungs. Jews have all the same stuff. They're just people. We're all people. And it's because of what they've been brought up to believe, or perhaps believe on their own. It's what's in between their ears that is the justification and sometimes the acceptance of violence against them. This is insane. This is madness. How can we possibly let this go on? And what can we do to detect it, prevent it, address it if, God forbid, it happens, and then recover from it? This is the kind of stuff that we need to address with our lawmakers, with the policymakers, with the people in charge of agencies and groups. This is the kind of stuff that sometimes is going to be preventable. And if it is, there's no excuse to miss what I call the dots. After 9/11, everybody, no matter what TV station you looked at, you had interviewer and alleged expert talking head over here saying, we failed to connect the dots. Everything was dots. Well, what we want to do is try to make sure that people who are in decision-making positions know what dots are. And those who can investigate matters that come to the attention of law enforcement can recognize what a potential dot might be. Because no terrorist activity has ever occurred without there being crime involved. There's always other crime. And it's not just, okay, I broke into a gun store and I got guns so that I can go do a terrorist act. Timothy McVeigh did a trespassing theft to get explosive igniters so that he could do what he did. It's all interconnected, it's all related. When we put out the initial invitation here, we had the word de jure in there. Now there's a homonym to, there are two homonyms to de jure. There is D-U-J-O-U-R, which means of the day, and there is D-E-J-U-R-E, which means by right. And this is the kind of stuff that Saul's talking about and the kind of things that we need to address. So there's no silver bullet, there's no magic wand. If I had it, we'd use it, and we'd be able to put some of these things to rest. But we can't. terrorism, anti-Semitism, and my third concept is hate crime. So what's a hate crime? It's a crime that occurred because of hate. Well, there are crimes that occur, when we classify crimes, historically in the United States, we classify crimes and then we subclassify them sometimes when it's appropriate. So an attack on the street of Brooklyn of a guy who's walking on the street, on the sidewalk, minding his own business, because of the way he's dressed, and the way he's dressed implies that he is Jewish, he gets attacked. That, I think, reasonably can be called a hate crime. If he gets attacked and so does somebody who's not dressed that way and they just get robbed for their cell phones, might not be a hate crime. So, terrorism, anti-Semitism, hate crimes. We have to be careful about what we call hate crimes. Because what we're doing is we're delving into the minds of the bad guys. We're delving into the minds of the bad guys, but why? And sometimes it's for sentencing, sometimes it's for probation or parole. We have to be careful about what we call these things. Recognize them for what they are. As Rashid Baz said, I only shot them because they were Jewish. This is where we are. So I don't want to ramble on too much. We're certainly open to questions, but I appreciate your attention. I'll leave you with one other thing as far as targeting goes. We've had mosque in New Zealand was targeted because of how they think. We've had churches targeted, attacked because of the way the people inside think. Same thing for synagogues. To me, I haven't done a statistical study on it, but it does seem to be on the rise over the last 3 or 4 years. More brazen. The attack in Jersey City, incredible. That was war. Absolute war. There was no doubt about it. Nobody gave up as soon as the police showed up in that one. We just need to be very cognizant, very careful. We have to know about our targets and learn about why and try to prevent it. So that's my part of it.
Thank you, Martin and Saul. So we're going to open up to questions, but what I want to begin by maybe asking a couple questions here and hearing your thoughts on this. We'll work our way backwards, so I'm going to ask Martin and then Saul if you have anything to add to it as well. So we spoke about a variety of different things, as you mentioned. You're talking about hate crimes. An individual attacks somebody in New York, right? Is that a hate crime? Is that terrorism? And so on. So, it was interesting. I had a conversation with Václav Klaus, the former president of the Czech Republic, and he asked me a question: what's the biggest threat to the West? The bottom line is, clearly it's one of those questions that, no matter what you say, you think you might be, he's looking for something else. So, clearly I said it was at the time, this was a couple years ago, I said it's either Russia or maybe militant Islam. And his response was no. The biggest threat to the West is the West itself. The policies to the extent where we'll take political correctness and so on, that is what he felt was the biggest threat to the West. So I say this because, to me, this is I see as anti-Semitism is the new terrorism. And while if you take each part in and of itself, it may not be terrorism, it may be hate speech, it may be a hate crime. But as we look at this evolving picture that we have, would you say, and from a law enforcement perspective, from a DHS perspective, a Homeland Security perspective, and so on, do we now look at this big picture of anti-Semitism as multifaceted terrorist program that would be out there, or is this really a stretch in saying you're pushing?
No, I think when we look at it in the whole, and it takes days to get the entire picture. Not even to propose solutions, not even to propose anything, just to get the entire picture takes days, because we have so much to look at and so many motivations by so many people. And let me go to your what you said about and what Saul had said about acceptance and tolerance of such acts. And I cannot help but think of, it was only a few weeks ago, we saw the viral video of the woman on the New York subway who was verbally attacking people because she perceived that they were Jewish. And she went on and on and on and on. And she committed crimes in doing that. She committed disorderly conduct. And I counted, I looked up the New York laws and in the penal code, and I found 4 laws that she broke. And 4 of those laws, and 4 laws also qualified easily for enhancement to becoming a hate crime or an enhanced prosecution, enhanced penalty. Yet, she wasn't charged with those. She was not charged with the hate crime part. It was let go. I'm a law and order guy. 2 + 2 = 4. Her behavior absolutely fit and could have fit into a textbook. I could have taught that in a police academy. This is exactly what a hate crime is. Yet, and I don't know who made the decisions, I don't know why, but there was a little bit of talk after it happened about, oh, is this going to be a hate crime or not? Oh, the prosecutor, whomever it was, decided this is not a hate crime, or they're not going to charge a hate crime. This is more permission. This is more permissiveness. This is more ignorance, and it cannot go well. What if, on the other hand, what if that woman was charged with a hate crime? Maybe that would catch a little more attention, perhaps have some better effect on somebody else down the road. I don't know. You can never tell what you prevent, unfortunately. So I'm sorry to be verbose about it, but yeah, these are the points. This is what it is.
Same question?
Same question, your thoughts?
Just my thoughts, of course, by now I don't quite remember the question, but I do remember some of the answer. To add to that case in the subway in New York, I would say that not a month ago, there was an egregious case where a woman physically assaulted a Jewish pedestrian in Brooklyn, only to be freed a few hours later to go and do it again and again. And at what point as a society we find this intolerable? In France, the Gilets jaunes, who seem to have quite a number of fans in the US, routinely chant Jews out of France when they protest the feeble attempts of President Macron at minor liberalization of the French economy. On both sides of the Atlantic, it's not uncommon to hear that banks are controlled by Jews, Hollywood is controlled by Jews. Oh my God, the Jews control the Federal Reserve. And I don't see the reaction that I would like to see when people state these obnoxious canards that remind me of the protocols of the elders of Zion when I said that we are in Germany in 1933. There's a large percentage of the population that actually believes that. And many of them might go on to commit hate crimes, as Martin has very well defined them. But when it is an organized campaign, it's a completely different thing. Of course, one can say that every act of terrorism is, in essence, a hate crime. That's why they do it. But what's the difference between the individual act and the organized act? And my worry is particularly with the organized act, with the organizations that promote this. And a phenomenon occurs that Hofner referred to 50 years ago of mass, not mass hysteria, but of the massification of an idea where a lot of people begin to follow it and feeding on itself. And that's how mass movements are created. And we have the elements here. And we still have time to defuse that bomb, but at one point, it will no longer be diffusible. And we're gonna find ourselves living in a society that is not what we wanted. That Deputy Prime Minister of Spain began his career 80 years ago as a TV host in a channel in Spain called Hispa TV, which was wholly owned by the government of Iran and run by Iran's Revolutionary Guards, where they routinely post anti-Semitic and Holocaust denying, and of course the US is in the hands of Israel and Congress is in the grasp of the Jewish lobby. And those people have been peddling that crap for a decade without anybody worrying about it. And then in 2014, the government of Iran, for $6 million, added to a couple of million from Hugo Chavez to launch their political party, Podemos, which now is the fourth largest party in Spain with 20% of the vote and the deputy prime minister position. How do we fight that? That is the institutionalization of hate, which I think is what we need to connect the dots. We need to identify the dots.
So thank you. I'm just going to add, I'll open it to questions if anybody has, but I wanted to, before I do that, I want to ask our Saul and Martin, if you have any questions for each other before we move on to, or any thoughts before we move on.
Actually, I was going to try to interrupt you. Actually, I did want to ask Saul, and I want to bring it back to the United States. We may recall that the Jersey City attack went on for over an hour. The two people who were the attackers who were killed, they were using a stolen van, a stolen U-Haul van, and they actually killed a cop. They actually killed a cop before they took on this attack. Now here, that's just a reminder. Now in that van, in that stolen van, was a handwritten little manifesto, mini manifesto, and I'll quote it. One of them had written, "I do this because my creator makes me do this, and I hate who he hates." So, these people were, they self-identified as being the Black Hebrew Israelite movement members, which has nothing to do with Judaism, but nevertheless, I just think that may point to an example of what you were talking about as far as, with the thoughts and the motivations. But I defy anyone to show me the creator's words that say, "Kill Jews." It isn't out there, no matter what you believe in. Nobody.
The opposite might be true, actually.
Yeah,
But,
maybe perhaps one, but I'm not getting into that one. But I mean, in our normal worship, normal houses of worship, normal belief systems, more mainstream. Not anybody can be an extremist, right? Anybody, you can believe anything and become an extremist. But I do this because my creator makes me do this, and I hate who he hates. That's just, when you were talking, that's what
that
rang.
defines the thing, and it defines the terrorist organization, the organization that as such is willing to commit violent acts in order to impose its ideology. That is the textbook definition. You're correct, there are extremists in every religion, in every political ideology, but we shouldn't fall into a moral equivalency test. Not every fanatic is the same. Some are quite harmless from a societal point of view, but these are not. The Black Hebrew Israelites come to mind, the Nation of Islam, and its obnoxious anti-Semitic diatribe for years, just waiting for violent acts to commence. Michael Jackson didn't get the "Don't Jew Me" out of thin air. It's part of a culture that blames the Jews for the troubles of an entire community, whether true or not is absolutely irrelevant. So that is the key to the question, and what you point out in New Jersey is one of the most worrisome events in the US, because it is the switch from individual acts of hate into organized acts of terrorism.
I want to open it if anybody has any questions, thoughts.
So terrorism is using violence to achieve political goal. Terrorists around the world try to achieve goals like getting overseas parliament or achieving autonomy. So what would you, a question for you?
For whom, I'm sorry?
Both of you, I would say. What is the end goal of these acts of violence towards Jews? What is the end goal, the end political goal that we can see if this course of action is not corrected in the future?
So just, is there anybody in the room who didn't hear what he said? I can't speak publicly, so I just make sure. So what you were talking about is you're asking, the bottom line question is you're asking, what is the end goal of attacking people who are Jewish or the anti-Semitic violence? In as much as others have, perhaps if I may insert for you, that others have very clearly defined goals. Like, so.
Let me go for that. It's a necessary step in the development of a mass movement. A common enemy that agglutinates the members and provides them with a common purpose. It really doesn't matter whether we are talking about the Jews or the Navajo, or put in whatever name you want. As long as we have a common target that allows us both to blame our ills into a group and to vent our rage and use it as a glue that unites us in that movement, that is what they do. So the short answer for you is the goal of targeting a particular group is to provide for their group's cohesiveness. Now, some of these groups have collectivist ideologies. Like the Yellow Vests. Some are reminiscent of National Socialists. There are some nativist groups and white supremacists that do exactly the same thing. For them, it is Jews and blacks. The purpose is to provide them with cohesiveness in the pursuit of their objectives, which vary greatly from one group to another.
And I don't think that there is, when you talk about anti-Semitic attacks in particular, I don't think that there is, that I know of, you fill me in, if there is a universal end goal that any attacker will have. Go back to 2018, Pittsburgh synagogue attack. And during that time, there was a guy named Robert Bowers, 46-year-old guy, and he was the one who did the attack. During the attack, he yelled out, "All Jews must die." Look, all Jews must die. Is that a goal? You know, it just reminded me, your question reminded me of what is the goal? Well, for him, that was his goal. Is it attainable? Of course not. Is it insane? Yes, it is. You know, it's crazy. So I still don't think that there is one universal, you know, when we're all done with this, we will have achieved, and then fill in the blank. Although there were individuals who say, yeah, I only shot them because they were Jewish, all Jews must die, this kind of thing. So I think it's I hate to say it, I hate to get so basic about it, but it's what's in the brain, and the brain tells the mouth and the hands and the feet what to do, and it's what comes between their ears.
To that point, that is why we need to differentiate between the individual action, or the action of the individual, and the coordinated action of a group.
Yes.
The motivations are completely different.
I've got two questions, mainly for Mr. Bradley. Firstly, I'm sorry to ask you this, but my boss likes to have all the panelists' names out. Could you spell out your name? It's not on the website in the preview.
I will. You're not the first one to ask for that. You're posing a little bit on Eli's patience, I'll tell you where it comes from. S-A-U-L, Saul, not Solomon, the other king. And the last name is hyphenated, M-O-N-T-E-S dash B-R-A-D-L-E-Y. And it's been hyphenated since 1870, where my American ancestors married a Spanish ancestors, and he was from a revolutionary family. His grandfather had been at the Bunker Hill and Lexington, and her father was one of the promoters of the first Spanish Republic, and they decided they wanted to keep both names. And since every member of my family has been castigated with a hyphenated name, we have to explain.
Hence your interest in Spain.
Oh, of course.
So my main question, you talked about how these boycott Israel, you see some of the boycott Israel movements, and we obviously, like, I'm a student, we see them all the time at our universities, campaigning all over. And you identified them with the rise of anti-Semitism. And as a student myself, that's kind of a bit surprising because, you know, my friends are part of these movements, and the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance's definition of anti-Semitism goes out of its way to exclude criticism of the actions of the government of Israel. So if you could just square that.
Yes, I don't believe that the criticism of the actions of any one particular government amount to racism, bigotry, or anti-Semitism. BDS goes beyond that. In its call for a boycott of Israel and language that refers to the Israeli apartheid, which goes to prove that they have very little knowledge of either Israel or apartheid. It is, or it has become, a politically correct way of disparaging Jews. When they speak of Israel, they don't speak of the Christian Druze that make a sizable amount of the Israeli population, or the Arab Israelis. They speak of the Jews. And as soon as you listen to a half an hour of their diatribe, you realize that. So yes, I do include BDS and their anti-Zionist, ill-defined anti-Zionist, anti-Israel diatribe as nothing more than a very fancy way of saying get the Jew. We can have a whole briefing on that subject. It's fascinating.
I think it would be good because, I mean, especially with university campus regulations on these things becoming more prevalent, it would be very useful to have like much more clear.
It would be very useful. Somebody would have to explain to me why some universities would roll out the red carpet for Ahmadinejad and close the door on the nose of Netanyahu. And the first one is justified on the notion that we need to hear from everybody, and the second one on the notion that we don't need to hear from the Jew. So that can be dressed any which way you want, but that's what it boils down to.
So you both spoke a lot about the normalization of, starting that stage to marginalization and increasing its way into crime and terrorism. So I guess this question's for both of you, but for Martin, I know you do more of the programming side of this, and you said you do a lot with law enforcement, but I think normalization goes a lot past law enforcement and starts on just like you were just saying, college campuses, like on a social level. So what does your organization do, or what could be done further past your organization for just people who are not necessarily part of law enforcement, but for kind of countering the normalization? And like, as personally a Jewish college student, I see it all the time around me, and like, what can just an everyday person do for counterbalancing that before it becomes violent?
Can I ask you to clarify what you say? You see that all the time. You see. Give me an example of what you're talking about.
Kind of what you were just saying, but anti-Zionist or anti-Israeli dialect turning into anti-Jewish and turning into the normalization of generalizing Jews and generalizing a subgroup of people, an ethnic or religious group of people, which I would define as bigotry and hate speech. But we don't really see that, at least in my experience in like America and the PC culture, we don't really see that being accepted with other groups of people, but I see it all the time being accepted, targeted against Jews.
And I think part of what, and our program is a work in progress. We're trying to get, that's one of the reasons we like talking with people like yourselves and other people in the groups, to try to form what's going to be best. And so from my point of view, just related to the acceptance of what you're seeing, which you think is absolutely abhorrent, I would move I would ensure that our program has at least a component where if things like that are not just silently tolerated, and I don't mean that you would tolerate it, I mean like, you know, you hear this kind of stuff, but what do you do about it? You just say, man, I can't believe that. You wander on, you know, you go about your business. But when it does come to the attention of officials, people in charge of anything, and then perhaps law enforcement, it has to be recognized as what could be the very beginning of something that will terminate in an act. So I'm willing to bet that nobody gets up having never thought about it before, gets up, gets a bowl of Cheerios and says, you know, I think I'm going to go attack that synagogue today. You know, it doesn't happen that way. Things start from thoughts and words, and those are the kind of words that if reported and brought to the attention of the right people should be recognized as potential pre-dots. I just made up a new word, pre-dots.
Well, I'm going to add something. I'm going to jump in.
Please.
So there are a lot's happening on college campuses as well. I mean, Martin's looking at it from a law enforcement perspective, but there are a lot of things happening on college campuses. There are a lot of institutions that come to college campuses and speak. I know the McAfee Task Force, amongst others, that spend a lot of time on college campuses trying to counter this. And that's all necessary, and that's all a first step. You know, it's the front line of this battle from that perspective. And in order to counter that movement, which ultimately turns into what we see today, because the fear, from my perspective, is that this is a multi-generational concern. It starts off on the college campuses, and then we move, then we graduate, and now it's no longer just on the college campuses, it's now in the workplace, and so on. So there is this first step, which is spending time on college campuses and responding to all of these accusations, verbal attacks, and so on. And a certain sense of education. There's certainly from a legislative process, and I know that there's a lot of discussion about that, especially on publicly funded universities, where those universities receive government funding. Should we or should we not allow such discussion? And of course, that goes into the First Amendment and so on. So now, but what we're now focused on right now internally at the Institute, and we're in this process, and this is, as Martin said, we definitely want to have this conversation, get people thinking about these questions. I suspect, which is kind of unique for a Hill briefing, that you might actually walk away with more questions than you have answers, which is actually, in reality, the intention here. Let's start the dialogue. Let's have people start thinking about it. And from our perspective, we're looking at it from the next level up, which is how do we counter the proactively? You know, we tend to have a reactionary policy, law enforcement policy, and sometimes it's impossible to connect the dots beforehand. And you know, it's always easy to look back and say, well, why didn't we see that? Of course. So what you're talking about is in fact a first step where what Martin and his team at the Institute is going to do is be able to bring the two together. Yourself, for example, the student on the campus, and the law enforcement side of things, where that will create that preemptive path forward. Francisco?
Yeah, I just want to say one thing. You did mention universities, but we need to go further down than that, because I have a friend of mine who I went through the public school system in the District of Columbia, and we're still friends, and some of the stuff he texts me, it just makes me even wonder if you even went to college. It's like, do you even research? I mean, he's just buying into a lot of this rhetoric, and it makes me scared to know that over 90% of the people who run public education are just indoctrinating kids to think a certain way. I mean, because I can tell you myself, coming through the Latino community here in the district, I was not told, I was told things that were not very nice about Jews. So it just literally took self-education on my end to realize a lot of those things were just false. And it's sad to see a lot of those community leaders, especially in minority populations that are influenced by this type of mentality, still holding these leadership these positions, and it makes me wonder why some of these would take them actually getting sued and having some sort of monetary damage for I don't know what, because then the next thing I think about is you have judges that probably won't honor those suits because they think of a certain way. So it's a battle that I think it's bigger than I think that most people are saying, especially with trying to change, if it's possible, to change what's being done in the public schools.
Oh, absolutely, and it turns into this multi-generational concern. So, maybe one more question?
Let me add, I'm sorry, let me add a little bit, because what can you do as a student when confronted with this? Very little, next to nothing. You're risking being the victim of assault if you do. In most of these instances, it can turn violent very quickly. This is something that we need to work starting at lower levels of education, and that is only a part of it, because education definitely is a part, but that won't do it. And in the meantime, there's very little you can do individually. I don't think there is, and this is what these people are counting on.
So in your research on terrorism and in your practice of training people on counterterrorism, what role do you think that social media has played in the rise of anti-Semitism?
I think it has played right into its hands. And I'm not being facetious, and I don't care which channel you watch. This is not a question of CNN versus Fox. Everywhere you see the signs. Everywhere you see the tolerance for anti-Israel and anti-Zionist propaganda. Everywhere you see a lack of outrage. So yes, it should be playing a role. We have developed as a society an allergy for the word propaganda, which everybody uses anyhow, but not in a positive way. So while these people, let's say, pushing the anti-Semitic agenda have become very adept, particularly at the use of social media. I have my own social media website, and I spend a good part of every week throwing them out. And in Twitter, it's a cesspool, and in other places like 4chan, 8chan, and a number of websites, it's profoundly disgusting. And the calls for violence are there. The education about the evils of the banking empires. Has anybody in this room that never heard the Rothschild canard? We all know what I'm talking about. That thing was started by the Nazi Ministry of Propaganda. And it's being discussed, and people mention it on TV, it's the Rothschilds, and they go, half of them don't know what they're talking about, and the other half are going along. So I think that it plays a role indirectly in the promotion, in the acceptance of these ideas.
Well, Saul, you just had the city council member here in DC blame the weather, the bad weather on the Rothschilds. And
There you go.
And nothing happened.
And how different is that from the city council in Valencia, stating that the city cannot do any business with Jews because they oppose the Israeli apartheid? And there we go again with the conflation of Jew and Israel.
Yeah, social media is extraordinarily powerful. I think we can all agree on that. Particularly when you have somebody who's soft-minded, somebody who's looking for directions. And we find that we find this with anti-Semitic attacks and school shooters and others who just they put together an attack plan, they execute the attack plan, and we find that they were influenced greatly by social media, be it videos of beheadings or no matter what it is. That guy who did the Pittsburgh synagogue shooting, Robert Bowers, he was active on social media, and he posted on Gab. I'm not familiar with every social media, but Gab apparently is one. Posted on Gab talking and put on there himself that he considered certain people to be invaders who would harm his people, and said, quote, "Screw your optics, I'm going in." What is that? I mean, this is all part of the social media part. And don't forget also that some of these people, through social media, are trying to lionize themselves when they are doing the attacks, because they are trying to broadcast it as they do it. And a couple of them have been successful. And that gets worldwide attention by people who otherwise wouldn't know what the hell social media is. Live broadcasting your own attack is extraordinarily powerful. And then you get somebody who does that, and then you get somebody who's soft-minded who thinks, hey, that was pretty cool, I think I'm going to do that too.
This is a new violent trolling, and it's a very alarming practice, by the way. New Zealand, San Diego, Pennsylvania, they were all being broadcast live with some kind of manifesto, which usually are the deranged rantings of a lunatic. But they're egging each other out in the fringes of social media into upping the ante and doing one more. Gab is a good example too. It's interesting though, because I see this on Twitter all the time, and for full disclosure, I'm banned in Twitter. Apparently, I am a harasser of sorts. One thing I wrote to someone about the treatment of Jews in World War II, and essentially the closing the doors on their faces. It was enough to ban me from Twitter. But you have everybody from Mohammed al-Houthi to these violent trolls peddling their violence daily without anybody seemingly worried about it. I don't think there is a form of racism, hatred, or bigotry that is not heavily promoted in those places, which is something that contributes to what we're discussing today.
In closing, I'm going to get my 2 cents into this, into your question as well. You know, when it comes to social media, you know, the big question often is, you know, Saul was talking about what happens in Europe and overseas and elsewhere in the globe. And we often think, well, we're looking here at U.S. policy, what should our policy be? But in reality, I mean, over the past 20, 30 years, and maybe even a little bit longer, we see an increase. Well, what happens in Europe is, we can assume, is going to happen here, and sometime soon. It's no longer a question of, well, that happened in Europe or that happened in the U.S. It's really now what's happening in the West. And so it's really relevant. It's not, let me rephrase it, it's far from irrelevant when Saul talks about Spain or Argentina or well, Britain is no longer part of Europe, so.
Well,
we can-
December 31st.
Okay, so we can now, but at the end, but the bottom line here is that, yes, social media, the college campuses, is all the front line of this very concern, of this, what I'll say, and as a growing terrorist movement. So with that, I want to thank everybody for joining us, and certainly please, I look forward to seeing you at our next and future briefings.